Yeah, I can hear just fine.
Good, good.
All right, we ready to
Let me
begin?
guess. Is it what time are you at right there? Are you like noon or 1:30 or something or what? Yeah,
Yeah, in
one.
Cincinnati, Ohio, it's 1 p.m.
Oh, good. Yeah, it's a cold, rainy, cold, wet, freaking 6 o'clock at night in England here.
Oh, you are in England. You're not in Canada.
No, I actually moved a year and a half or so ago to England. Been in Canada my whole life, and somehow I don't know how. I do know how, but I ended up in England.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense with Silver Lining Music and everything. That makes sense to be in England.
Nope. No, it doesn't. It had nothing to do with them.
Oh,
It was a
really?
woman.
Just a personal choice to move? Well, that's interesting. My mom was born in London, England, even though I've never been there. So that's good. It's good to get back to the European roots.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yes. It's also a real honor to finally speak to you. I've been an Annihilator fan since back in the Phantasmagoria demo days. So
Wow.
I have followed you
That's what.
every
Yeah,
album.
that's
Pardon?
what is that? 1985 or 86,
86.
I
Yeah, I think it
think.
was 86
Yeah.
is when I first discovered it. When I first discovered, yeah. And I finally saw you in '88 with Testament. Was the first time I ever
Wow.
saw you live. Yeah.
And that was the I think Rothschild America were the first band
Yes,
on,
that's
weren't they?
why, because I knew the guys in Rothschild America because they would always, even though they were a Detroit band, they would always come to Cincinnati and play Bogarts. And so I knew the guys in Seduce and
Yeah.
Rothschild America real well. And they put us on the list. And there's like, oh yeah, there's some band from Canada called Annihilator. I'm like, I think I've heard of them. I remember that Phantasmagoria demo. Okay, I'll be interested. This was before Allison Hell even came out. And this blew me away when you just did, just the stuff on stage. And I've been a fan ever since. Actually, remember that next
You
day.
know,
Go ahead.
that's very, very cool. That's very cool. It's also cool because I don't really often get to talk to people who know what the demos really were back then, and that it used to take you like a month or like 3 weeks to get your cassette demo mailed off to a fanzine in Italy, and another month or two to get the fanzine back when you're in it, when it's reviewed, and then it was just a crazy time.
Yeah, and it was definitely a cassette. I think mine was a dub of a dub of a dub because it also had
Yeah.
Pestilence. It also had Pestilence, who became what did they become? They were a band from Nevada, and it had like three other
Yeah,
bands
yeah.
on it. So it was like a dub of a dub of a dub. So the quality was terrible. When Bag of Tricks finally came
And
out, I was so excited to actually hear that stuff on CD and actually hear it for what it was. So
and you get to hear the hiss on the recording,
yeah, yeah,
which is
yeah,
just fantastic. And you
and
know what? I remember they had this. They had like Dolby C came out, so that when you dubbed from one cassette deck to the other, it was supposed to help you. But what it really did is it killed all the high end on your recording.
right. And my friends and I would dub so many demos. We would trade demos so much, the three of us. We always did the high speed dubbing because we only had like a weekend together. We were all in college, and we all had like a weekend together to
Oh
like
yeah,
to do it. So we had like 10 tapes. Like my friend wanted Sodom, and I wanted Sword from Canada, and then he wanted Tankard, and then he wanted Blood Feast. So we all had to like fight for who was getting what. So it was always high speed dubbing. So all you heard was a chip.
yeah.
You hear
I
the,
remember I had a friend who had this system where he had like 8 cassette decks that you would take a master and the other 8 decks would record the same thing at the same time, so he could multi-manufacture demos for everybody to buy or listen to. And I was thinking later on, I was like, is that legal?
Mine was just a head-to-head cassette to cassette, but it was always fun to listen to, the Chipmunks playing something because everything was on high-speed dubbing, so you always heard the high. But I do
Yeah.
remember when Allison Hell came out, I championed the hell out of it. A lot of my friends, we got a great local record store here, and I made sure they carried it. And when my friends first saw it on vinyl, they were like, "Oh, this looks great!" And then the video finally came out on MTV, and people were like, "Oh, that's that band you were talking about." And I'm like, "You got to hear this. You got to hear Welcome to Your Death. You got to hear Schizo's Never Alone Part 1 and 2." And to this day, I still, I lost my virginity, and I remember the first thing I said to the woman was like, "God, that burns like a buzzsaw blade."
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, we did. We just came back from a two. That's funny, actually. We just came back from a 2 month tour, and that was one of the last songs we played every night. We did a little tribute to that singer Randy Rampage on that
Right.
Allison Hell album, sang that Buzzsaw Blade song, and he passed away last year, I think,
two
of a
years
heart
ago.
attack. And
2 years ago in February, yeah.
we actually were going to bring him on tour last year. The tour we just finished like days ago, which I'm amazed I'm alive because it was like we're talking like a 2-month straight thing.
Jeez.
It was a very, actually, it sounds cheesy when I say it, but it was a big tour. It was a lot of, it was 400 people all the way up to thousands. So it was kind of like a theater and then a club and then a big hall and then a club and that tour was actually 1 year late because I moved to England, got married and moved to England and built a recording studio. But the immigration hearing in the UK had to take my passport, so I couldn't get it back in time for the tour. But also, the support band that was supposed to be on that tour was Rampage, and that was the band by Randy Rampage's band, solo band. So the whole thing was, my whole tour was postponed until the same time this year, and we just finished it. It was 2 months of just one hell of a fun time, and we did this tribute to Randy at the end. We did like 4 songs or so, and I said some stories that people seem to really like about that nobody knew about Randy, and
Exactly.
and yeah, it sure brings back memories of the days and of that first album and stuff for sure.
Absolutely. And yeah, I guess in February 2020 will be 2 years since he did pass. I know you did the reunion with him when you did Criterion of Black Widow. And I almost got to see that tour, but I missed it. But yeah, I mean, obviously we all remember the Randy Rampage days because that was the first Annihilator album on Roadrunner or Road Racer that we got to hear, and
Yeah,
it was just
I mean, Annihilator pretty much, for those who didn't know, I mean, at least with the internet out there for so long now, people have figured out a few things, but we literally had 3 records out in North America, our home country of Canada and the States, and that was it. We were gone. We haven't played a show in the United States since 1993.
That's what I thought.
And most of our records had not even been released there. They, of course, imports and labels overseas would sort of maybe flood them into the States at ridiculous prices. But
Yep.
essentially, that was it for the band. I mean, that was really it. We became a Japan, Europe band, and now just basically a European band where we'll do some festivals and stuff, but essentially Europe is where we play every summer and we do tours every year, and it's just lots of fun stuff. And it's people in North America seem to remember the first 2 records we did mostly.
Absolutely.
When you mentioned Criteria for Black Widow, where Randy came back, I mean, we'd been sort of out of the U.S. and Canada for 6 years at that point, and never stepped foot in Canada other than to rehearse. So yeah, it's been an interesting career on my end. And when Randy came back in '99 after being in for a year in '89, then all of a sudden 2019 or 18 actually was going to be his sort of fun return, where we could, this year we could celebrate the Alice in Hell 30-year anniversary and get him up on stage and do some songs. But then we found out he passed away, so it sucked.
Well, and my favorite album still to this date is Never Neverland, even with Coben Farr, who later joined Omen for Escape to Nowhere. But by the way, I'm not using the internet. I'm just on a phone right now. I don't believe in using all that old sources. I'm a fan, so you'll tell. I was actually interested to find out that, because I remember getting a promo with Set the World Afire, and I love that album. I still think it's highly underrated, but I had no idea Mike Mangini from Dream Theater played drums on that. I was interested to find that out, that he'd actually been Annihilator twice.
Yeah, I think he played on at least 2, maybe. No, I think maybe 3 albums, maybe more, but I think for sure. And he was. I remember his first tour was with us on the Set the World on Fire album in '93, but then we went to the States and Canada on that one. That was the last tour in North America, and Nuno Betancourt came. I think he came to one of the shows, but it was pretty much a simple thing of, hey, I hope you don't mind if I take your drummer. It was like, it was very clear. It was like, well, of course not, because it's Mike Mangini. This kid's going to be something. So, you don't hold someone back. And
exactly.
He went from there to Steve Vai, and then he did some other stuff, and then he went to Extreme and Steve Vai, and then he did... now, of course, for years he's been in Dream Theater.
Yeah, 7 years now in Dream Theater. It's hard to believe. Well, and you also had Randy Black, who was in Primal Fear and is now in Destruction. I remember talking to Randy a number of years ago when he was with Primal Fear, all about how awesome he was with Annihilator. So.
Hey, Randy was just saw him at one of our shows in Berlin a few weeks ago, and before that he flew up with my drummer. My drummer's an Italian dude named Fabio, which sounds Italian to me.
Yes.
And our drummer Fabio was, when I built the studio, I said, hey, why don't we get, because he knows Mike Mangini. And he said, Fabio said, listen, when we're setting up the drums for the new record, why don't we get Randy Black to just jump on a plane and fly up, because he lives in Berlin, and it's a pretty quick flight up here to where we are in England, and which is a bonus of moving to England, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Basically, Randy Black came up to hang out with us, and we've had all these cool European musicians now able to fly up and sort of hang out with us. But Randy was given, we brought him up to give Fabio and myself some advice on just how Randy plays so damn perfectly in the studio. He's a machine.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like we were both getting lessons in a sense. I was getting a little lessons on how he hits the drums to make them sound better, and Fabio was getting a little bit of lessons on this how to sort of practice getting a little more perfect timing like a machine. And that's good, because our drummer Fabio is a fan of Ray Hartman, and Ray Hartman is our first drummer on the album, Hell and Neverland album.
Absolutely.
The Mothers. And Ray Hartman was not a drummer that played to a click track. He's not a drummer that really put his focus on being perfect as far as computer perfection timing. He was more of the Dean Castronova, Tommy Aldridge, rock and roll, hard rock,
right,
field drummer, and I pulled Ray into more of, hey, you got to get your timing more perfect. So that was really good for him as a drummer. But Ray was the one that had all the flavor and the feel, and that was actually Mangini is the kid genius, the one that every drummer in the world, no matter what they really say, they're going to sleep at night realizing Mike is just a freak of nature and one of the most insane human beings there is as far as drumming and music.
Right.
But Randy Black is a human drum machine. He's that perfect.
Which is why he
kind of
fits so well. He fits so well in Destruction now. I mean, he's just perfect for Destruction. So
yeah, he really, it's like certain bands you hear about, and all of a sudden they make a drummer change after decades or something, and then everybody in the band stands up and goes, "Oh my God! Now we have to practice. We're 20 years into our career, and now we actually have to practice our instruments to keep up with this drummer playing so good."
Right.
And that was, it's pretty cool when you see, Mike and Schmier from Destruction, and they've got a new guitar player now. To see someone like Randy drop into a band like that and watch 50-something-year-old guys go, oh shit, I got to practice now.
Well, it's interesting though. You mentioned how you can, you got Fabio as your new drummer, and you continue to have drummers, but other than that, it's all you DIY: vocals, lyrics, guitar, bass, and I think that's something we all love. Is the fact the last few albums have evoked that early sense of it's just you doing it all. And people have been asking me what I think of the new album, and I'm like, oh my God, it's so awesome. I mean, it's like, how does he keep doing it? This is what, your 17th studio album, and maybe 16th. And how do you keep doing it? How do you keep writing good quality songs that have guitar that just kicks ass? And
well, I'm gonna slam myself here. While I appreciate your nice comments, I do the devil's advocate thing even with myself to keep myself in check, I think. And I think that if you look at every artist that let's say what I like Priest, Maiden, Slayer, AC/DC, Kiss, Van Halen, whatever. Metallica, everybody. I like so many good bands. But if you take some of the bands I just mentioned, you're never going to have a second Back in Black. You're never going to get Powerslave and Number of the Beast again. You're never going to get Screamers for Vengeance and Defenders of the Faith and Painkiller again. You're never going to get, I could go on and on.
I gotcha.
It's just we all want to do some different than others. I was going to say we all want to do our best, but I know and people we know, musicians that get distracted, or maybe they're doing it for the wrong reasons possibly, or whatever. But I always try to do the best I can. The problem is you can never write a great album or a great song every time. You think you do because it's your baby and you create it and you love it when you make it. But I've always tried my best to sort of have this reality check, which is maybe 6 months or 3 months after an album's done, or a year later. I sort of rate it on a scale of 10, and I go, well, Never Never Land of mine was a 9 out of 10, and 8 out of 10 was Alice in Hell, and this album was only a 4. And so I go through this thing to sort of keep it in check, but I don't need to. Everybody knows that if you have a favorite band that has 10 albums, there's a few of those records that you don't even listen to.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's just not important to you because it didn't seem to work for you. And Annihilator's the same way. We've been cruising through having some, remember our following is 95% in Europe,
right,
as far as sales and concert tickets and all that stuff go. It's at least 95% in Europe. And so we've got this, I'm talking to you from, Canadian, United States perspective, North American perspective. I'm conscious when I'm talking to you that it's not the same as if I was talking to somebody from Germany or Sofia, Bulgaria, where we played one thing. We co-headlined to like I don't know how many 40,000 people with Slayer.
That's awesome.
Whereas if I'm talking to someone from the States, sometimes they'll go, oh, didn't they have that album called Alice in Hell once? You know what I mean? Like, so it's kind of when I'm talking to you, I kind of shift my discussion a little bit or my answers. But I always try to do good records, but that is not possible for anyone. And I think in my career, I've had, again, the ups and downs. And you write some good stuff, you don't write good stuff. You write some great stuff, you write some bordering crappy stuff that you regret and you wish you had more inspiration. But that's the key, is for a band that's been around a long time or a writer that's been around, you got to get inspired. And unfortunately, you can't always do it. You try, but you just can't. And I think what I'm guessing here is from the European reaction and some of the North Americans I've talked to in the last week, it seems like Metallica is not going to get Justice for All and Master of Puppets again. We know that. But what we do know is, like, for me personally, when Death Magnetic came out, I jumped in my Camaro and I drove around the city of Ottawa or wherever I was at the time, and I drove around and listened to the album at least 2 times in a row. And I was sitting here going, wow, it's not as good as Master of Puppets. It's not as good as, Justice for All. And then I stopped and I was like, what is your problem? It's decades later. You're listening to it over and over again. You're smiling. You're tapping your other foot that's not being used for the gas or the brake. And you're banging your head a bit. And you just had 2 hours of smiling and loving this shit. So I think the bottom line is you can go back to, as a band, if you're inspired, you can go back and maybe recapture some of the early stuff that was your great stuff sometimes. You're never going to be as great, but what you can do is make people smile and go, hey, that reminds me of that song off Never Never Land called Stonewall. And it's not a rip-off. It just gives me a feeling of that song. And that's kind of like how I feel about this new record is it's giving me that Death Magnetic feeling of me driving around in the car. And even their last album sort of had the traces of the early stuff, of course. And I can't say I like their new album or Death Magnetic better than Master Puppets and Justice, but I can sure tell you I bought those new records and I listened to them and I like them. So I think if I can do that on an album once in a while by luck and inspiration, then that's all I can do.
And I totally concur with that. I was the same way. After Load and Reload and whatever that one was after was even worse. I totally agree. When I first heard Death Magnetic, I was like, oh my God, Metallica are back. This is amazing. And I think that's a great comparison that you should mention that, because you're right. You have recaptured. The more I listen to the new album, I'm like, okay, that does remind me of something of Never Never Land or Alice in Hell, but you've got that unique guitar style that you have anyway. Also, you like to write a lot about schizophrenics and psycho people and people insane, and so it just instantly comes back, and I think that's great. You're right, it's never going to be what it once was. That was a different era, different time, a different mindset. Like you said, it was before the internet. A lot of these people who may have learned about the band or second or third generation did not experience that firsthand. Like I remember buying Alice in Hell when it first came out and playing that for 4 and 6 hours straight over and over and reading the lyrics, and to this day every time I kill a bug I say I'm human insecticide. So I mean, there's certain things that just stick with you that never go away. But in the last 2 albums, go ahead.
That's one of the it is one of the coolest things ever, because Schmier and Mila from Destruction Creator, we used to joke about this a lot way back, and when I finally got over there for the Alice in Hell tour, Mila and Schmier came out to see our first shows out there and got backstage and were like, Jeff, we wanted to meet you. And they had these stories about how they would grab some weed and some booze and they would all get together, some of these German metal bands that were starting out with their early records, and they would listen to these different records and go Razor and Annihilator, Alice in Hell, and demos and things like that. And they would get together and do the same thing I was doing with their music back in Canada. And we were trading tapes, as you know. We were, before we became a band, during being a band, making demos as a band. And it was real. It was a real community and a different scene. But I think getting back to songwriting and records, it was a different scene and a different time, but it was also, again, and you've heard these remarks, you see them on forums, you hear people talk about it, musicians, fans, everybody in press. You hear things like, oh, well, if Metallica, with all their millions and all their money now and their private jets and all this stuff, how could they possibly write songs like they did before? But that's the same with everybody. It doesn't matter if you got millions. If you're 20, like I was, a 19-year-old drinking and smoking metalhead, sitting in my parents or friends' basement, writing metal songs, trying to be like the first Metallica album and Judas Priest and all that. And all of a sudden now, you've got kids, you got a family, you got a recording studio, you got taxes, you got a house, you got cars, you got responsibilities, you've got all these things. I haven't drank now coming up to 20 years. This December 31st, I've been completely sober for 20 years at the end of this month.
Congratulations.
And you're damn right I can't go and sit here and write a song like I did in those early days. How could anybody possibly do that? So it really, no band that I know of has ever done that. So the fact that a lot of fans are always saying to certain bands, they're, bands that are like 20, 30 years old, older, like been around for that long, the fact that any fans that aren't teenagers that are sitting here going, oh, they'll never beat the early stuff, and it's kind of like, of course they can't. Enjoy what they got now, and if you don't like it, buy something else.
Exactly. And there was something very special about that mid-'80s Canadian speed metal thrash sound that Razor and Sacrifice and Exciter and Voivod and your band were all doing that was unprecedented at the time. So, Anvil, of course.
That was, I think, okay, we know that the British wave of metal had a huge influence on, back to Metallica and everybody else, but one thing that was a little unique about Canadian bands, we didn't have the population of the United States. We didn't have the amount of clubs and big press and money, so to speak, in the industry. But what we also had was sort of like a geography of being cramped in the middle of United States bands we loved and British bands we loved. I mean, sure, there was, Loudness from Japan. There was Scorpions, and we had the, Creator Destruction coming up and things like that. But generally, Canadians have this kind of unique sound simply because we've got two things to listen to. We had the Brits and we had the Americans. And that's where you get, I mean, I know it's different kinds of music, but that's where you get Bryan Adams. It's where you get
the Guess Who.
You get Rush, you get Anvil, you get Devin Townsend, you get all these different Voivod, you get all these bands that are like, wait a minute, they might like, Possessed or whoever they are, Sacrifice or whatever. You might hear Slayer in my music or other Canadian bands, thrash bands music, but you're also hearing something coming from somewhere else, from a different part of the world than the Bay Area and the United States. So you're getting a real, more evenly distributed influence from British and American bands. And I think that's where we had a little bit of a uniqueness to us because we're such fans of bands from both different countries, basically. Whereas, American bands either pull from their UK heavy metal roots, or they pull for all the great US metal bands that have been before them. Or at the same time. So I think we had kind of a unique look on it. We didn't have a lot of bands, but what we had was more, I think a lot more originality in the small numbers we had.
Yeah, but you also had April Wine. You also had the Guess Who. You also had Triumph. You also had Bachman Turner Overdrive. You also had Kim Mitchell. Besides Bryan Adams, you had Lee Aaron. Canada had some of the most underrated musicians out there. So that you combine that with the European, the German, and the Bay Area or the Florida sound, and then Savatage and Crimson Glory and Nasty Savage, and then you come and coalesce into a band like, I actually don't even think Annihilator has any Slayer, maybe Show No Mercy kind of influences, but you got much more technicality like the early stuff like Death Angel and Testament and Law's Rocket and Heathen. But what amazes
Yeah,
me today is that you still have that guitar style that is, if you hear an Annihilator song, you know it, whether it's from the Joe Comeau eras or whether it was from the Dave Padden era, because you put out, as far as I'm concerned, you put out with all the albums with all those artists that I think stand alone that are just so good. And I think they just, I like, the only really Annihilator album I don't like, and I never did like, and I've been very adamant about not liking, is Remains,
yeah,
because that's when you tried something
yeah,
completely
yeah.
different. But Wasp tried
Exactly.
KFD, and every band, Slayer did Diablos to Musical. Every band tries something different, you know. But I think it's very
Yeah.
humbling of you not to. You still, you are Jeff Waters from Annihilator. You are the guitar, bass, and vocals of a sound from Canada that we all very much venerate and appreciate, and has been hard to imitate. I know there's a lot of new Canadian bands coming out, and I know they definitely cite you as a huge influence. So
Awesome. You know what? That was a lot of information. It all sounded good, and I was just my last thought as you were ending was, I don't know why this came up into my mind. It was a random thought. I thought in the '90s when it seemed like metal was just gone or just being held together by the bigger bands and in the underground. I remember it was. Do you remember the time when even Metallica and bands were saying, "Why do a guitar solo? What's
yeah,
the
oh
point?"
yeah,
This
absolutely.
kind of thing. And
Saint
and
Anger.
stuff. And that was when I was sitting in Ottawa, Canada, shaking my head, feeling very depressed about the type of music genre that I'm in right now, or the location I was living, which is North America, because I thought, I know metal's kind of dropped its status also in Europe, but you still go to Europe and they have any given weekend from May to August, they're going to have freaking 10, 15 music festivals
Yep.
where a metal band can play, and some of them have up to 80,000 people.
Yep.
So it was like, I just felt so depressed that I was in a genre of music that was just getting treated like shit in North America.
Yep.
But I remember, my favorite bands even coming out and saying, screw heavy metal, it's dead. Or they would say, oh, we don't do guitar solos now. It's not cool or not in fashion. And you know what the sad part is? That sort of drove out the whole reason that metal in general was so good, was because guitar players would sit down in their basement or their parents' bay or whatever, and they would practice 4 to 10 hours a day and learn from like greats, Van Halen, Randy Rhoads, all these people that were also taking classical lessons or jazz, or Van Halen was learning and rehearsing Alan Holdsworth songs, and it was an art form. You couldn't just pick up a guitar, strum a bunch of chords, dye your hair red, and jump up and down like Flea. You had to actually learn your instrument and listen to the history of guitar and blues and stuff like that. Whereas then all of a sudden, the greatest metal band of all time, you could argue, was Metallica, was out there changing up what they're doing, which was rightfully so. Why not? That's how they stayed alive. And declaring, not saying they were declaring solos were dead, but if I remember correctly, I think they didn't do any, or almost didn't do any.
Not on
Right?
Saint Anger. It's an album completely bereft of solos. But meanwhile,
And
Michael
you know what?
Schenker. I was gonna say Michael Schenker and Richie Blackmore and Wolf Hoffman were continue to put out kick-ass albums.
Yeah, but where were they living? They weren't living in Canada or the States,
Oh
right?
no, they're all European.
They
Germany and England.
those bands they fell off the radar. People didn't realize that, the United States and Canada didn't realize the band called Saxon that was around with Fields of Steel and all this stuff, that they were still going right up until today,
Exactly.
packing festivals. And they didn't realize all these bands continued overseas. But then I noticed, I was watching, MTV and Much Music, the Canadian American ones, right?
Right,
And
right.
all of a sudden I saw some 41, a Canadian sort of pop punk band. And I saw these bands. I saw them wearing Iron Maiden and Motorhead and Judas Priest shirts in their music videos.
Yep.
And I was like, hang on, there's still hope, because I thought if kids are today at 14 or 11 Sum 41, and Sum 41 all of a sudden in the middle of that video was doing an Iron Maiden harmony solo,
Yep.
I thought, holy crap, there's hope. And then what happened, not because of that, but that whole mentality turned around to, who's Judas Priest? Who's this Motorhead? Who's this Iron Maiden that Sum 41 and the bands like that are promoting? And then the kids started discovering it through the internet and realizing, wow, listen to this Motorhead. We are the road crew. Well, I mean, what is this stuff? Because all they got was Ozzy Osbourne, Ozfest, and they got Metallica telling them what metal was, and then they started getting Limp Bizkit and Korn, and they started getting all these bands saying that we're metal, and they were metal. They were just a different type, but people thought that was metal and heavy metal. And then you had guys like Dan Dunnigan from Disturbed. I read a headline once years ago, and he said, "I'm bringing back the guitar solo." And I was thinking, like I was shaking my head because, the guitar solo's been playing nonstop in Europe every single day and night.
Oh, yeah.
It never moved. And Dan Dunnigan is going to bring back the guitar solo. I was just like, I was so disgusted by the state of North American music that I just basically screwed off and stayed overseas,
And I totally get it.
And then the final thing was for me was the rebound to me that I was like, yes, it's on the right track and everything's great now. As a fan, I'm happy. Nobody gives a crap what I say about it, but me as a metal fan, a genuine metal fan, from the beginning, then I saw bands, guitar players like Alexi Leho, then Corey and Matt from Trivium, and I saw these U.S. bands, players, all of a sudden doing solos, and I was like, oh shit, this is what we need. Like, this is it. Keep it going, guys. And I'd watch Corey and Matt, like I toured with them in Europe once, with Annihilator, and I'd always pop in the dressing room, say hi to the guys, and all day they would be downloading the tab. I guess I've never read tab, but I guess it's that stuff you download, simple way to read the music and for different songs and scales and things. And I would go in every day on this tour and look at these guys, and I'd be just laying around sightseeing, going to eat some food, hanging out with my guys. And these guys would spend 6 hours a day downloading tabs so they could learn the next Randy Rhoads lick or the next Van Halen thing or the next, Michael Schenker solo. And they would practice to get better. And I was like, wow, this is ridiculous. These guys are only 20 years old or whatever they are. And then that was 2007. Right. That's when I knew personally that, here we go. These guys are starting to realize how good the musicianship and the players were in the 80s, and they're actually learning this stuff now. So that's what you got now. You've got some people that are just phenomenal musicians.
Absolutely. And I think it's great for two things. One, at work, people always call me. They say I'm a grandpa or an old man's metalhead because I like Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Accept, Rush, Motorhead, and Black Sabbath. So that's old man's metal. Because you're right. They like Slipknot and they like Disturbed and they like all the stuff that we would never call metal. And then also, I think it's great that you're on the same label as icons like Saxon and Diamond Head, who never went away. But people only know Diamond Head through the Metallica covers, and people only know Saxon if they think back of like, oh yeah, that's right, Wheels of Steel or Denim and Leather and stuff. Not realizing Saxon never disbanded, Diamond Head never disbanded, And you're right, I know the guys in Trivium too. I sat down and talked to them. It was the bass player's birthday at one show, and I was telling them about so many bands that they never heard, and they were like, oh, I want to hear this band, I want to hear this band, I want to hear this band. So that hunger and avarice that for knowledge of old style guitar playing. And you mentioned Randy Rhoads, or you mentioned Eddie Van Halen. I like to mention Michael Schenker, Richie Blackmore, Wolf Hoffman, Rick Emmett from Triumph. These guys who never stopped playing solos and had played guitar, double guitar. Even Jimmy Page. So you're right. There was something about something happened in the U.S. and I think that is because of the media, and I think because of MTV and all that stuff where it wasn't popular. But that's when I was in the '90s, constantly going to shows and buying imports of Annihilator, Running Wild, Rage, Blind Guardian, Gamma Ray, Candlemass, because that was the only way I could ever get that stuff was through import. At least now it's a lot more accessible. But I think it's good that people.
I think with my band, it's been very slow in North America. There's been no deals. There's been no decent offers. There's been no offers for touring. There's been none of that stuff, and it's been kind of like, also I didn't aggressively try because I've been too busy nonstop in Europe right now, and we're talking for 30 years, not 3 months. So it's kind of like, but with the internet, you're realizing that it might take 10 years or 5 more years or 2 more years, but people are discovering a lot of the bands that are either still going strong in Europe or they're just faded away and couldn't continue because of the just bad luck or whatever it was. And I think that is the bonus of the internet, of course, that you can be a kid somewhere in Canada or the States, and then all of a sudden, wow, you discover this band called Exciter that you never really heard about before. And then you go, holy crap, Violence of Force, Heavy Metal Maniac, and you're just like, wow, this stuff is amazing. And then guess what? You find out that up until last year, Exciter would play maybe 1 or 2 shows a year with a kind of different lineup, but then now they've got 2/3 of their singing drummer Dan Beeler lineup back, and they've been probably going to end up doing 20, 30 shows this year, and kicking butt.
For a minute, they had all 3 original members, but then they lost again. But that's what's cool about social media to a certain extent, even Facebook, because then you can actually get to know your personal heroes, like the guys from Exciter who post every day, or the guys from Anvil who post every day, and you can actually get to know them. I know I actually sent you a Facebook request under the title Metal Milieu, which I thought you'd get a kick out of, which is actually my Facebook page, because that's what's so cool, that you can continue to correspond with these people who have been your heroes for so long, and you can just literally text messages back and forth. One thing I did want to ask, on your last album, For the Demented, you had 4 videos that got, once again, today's MTV is clearly YouTube. Are you planning to do any videos for the new album?
Yeah, this one lyric video came out last month for a song called "I Am Warfare." This real video that came out a few weeks ago for a song called "Psycho Ward." That's kind of our Stonewall Never Neverland kind of vibe
That's
song.
A great song, yes.
Then I think on tomorrow, the next day, we got one coming out for a song called Armed to the Teeth. And then we got another one coming out for a song called Dress Up for Evil, probably coming out in January. So yeah, we're kind of... Then we shot some live video on the tour and stuff like that of some of the bigger places we played, and to make us look like rock stars, of course. And it was just like, we're going to put some of that in there, because our kind of like in the last couple of years, our live show is kind of seems to be the fun part for fans right now. So we're really, we did two months of shows, and I just got back a couple days ago from Russia, the last dates, and it's this live thing is just becoming, I don't get it. I'm 53, and it's just becoming more and more intense, more sweat, more energy, and it's a lot of fun.
You look great for 53, by the way. Armed to the Teeth, that actually features the title Ballistic, Sadistic in it, in the lyrics, right?
Say it again?
Armed to the Teeth actually features Ballistic, Sadistic in the lyrics, the album title, right?
Yeah, it's like the main words in the chorus and stuff, and it's. I just pulled it out of there because I just pulled those out. I literally scanned the lyrics for the entire record, desperately searching for a title, because sometimes that's an easy thing to do, and you can grab one of the titles of your songs even, and it works. And it sucks if it's not like, for our example, our first, not the first song on the album, the second song on our first record was called Out in Hell, and that sort of made for a no-brainer to call the album that. But because that song
right after Crystal Ann, right?
More melodic commercial standout of the record, but this album didn't have any of the song titles that made any sense, and when they did, I realized other bands had those titles way before.
Right.
So I desperately scanned through all the lyrics in the record, and those 2 hit me, and I went, yes, there we go.
Yeah, and I think I'm guessing that the artwork is based on Psycho Ward, right? But the lyrics, the album title is called Ballistic, Sadistic, but with the chick holding the brick with their thing ready to fight back, that kind of seems like maybe the Psycho Ward, or possibly... I
think it's a common... There's, I think, about 7 songs on the record lyrically are dealing with, let's say, fictional and non-fictional domestic abuse theme. And
kind of thought so, yeah.
I kind of hit that on that subject of 4 or 5 songs in the last 20 years. A lot of my lyrics end up being goofy, silly, about fun stuff, about food,
craft dinner,
about things on the news, and then sometimes about addiction, depression, alcoholism, death of a family member to cancer. So I sort of touch on so many different subjects, and if you're new to the band and you hit on the wrong one that doesn't make sense to you, like if you see a name Annihilator and you're a real heavy fan of heavy music, and you hit some of our songs, you're going to go, what the hell is this? But that's kind of my writing style, has been based on personal experience or things I see, or not reality, or I can take mental illness and I can turn it into a goofy, crazy, schizo, fantasy, fun song, almost not even making fun of it, but just kind of in a way doing that. But also write a song that actually deals about mental illness and things. Like on the last album we did called For the Demented, there was a couple of songs in there that were very serious about everything from ADHD to just all the people in history that have been mentally, I don't know what the politically correct word is, but mentally challenged or given a tough break in life in certain areas, and who've turned around and done greater things than the average person has ever done in life. And
yeah, the whole insanity and genius type thing. Actually, I got a sense that For the Demented was also about metalheads, for the underground, for those who are the not understood, black T-shirts and long hair. You're always pariah, put aside. But hey, we know who we are. I have noticed in a 35, 40-year career of Annihilator, though, like you say, dementia, psychosis, mental illness have always been kind of an underlying theme. From Psychos Are Never Alone to Sixes and Sevens, just the Psycho Ward. But I think that's great, because that's kind of we kind of do have a sense of insanity, and we do kind of a sense of genius and insanity, and where are we coming from, and what's going on. My son's special needs, and people say, well, what is autism, or what is on the spectrum, or something like that. I think in the 90s I was a teacher, and people were ADHD, or I don't know, what was the other thing, the chemical imbalance. People always seem to label something they don't understand. But I think there's a certain sense about that I think is truly metal, METTLE, which is that spirit and drive and determination that keeps you going. So, and
yeah, I mean, I've had ADHD since I was obviously since I was a kid, but didn't know it until later in life, of course. And I was able to manage it, even though I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what was wrong here, but something was definitely weird about me. I remember as a kid, my mom quietly told me later in life that, oh yeah, we tried you on that drug Ritalin for a while when you were a little kid, but we took you off it because you were acting very strange. And that would have been in the 70s. And my son has ADHD, and my father had ADHD. So or whatever the other short form without the hyper part in it.
I think would you say I'm obsessive or compulsive and something else?
You're OCD and bipolar.
Yeah, I'm OCD and bipolar, so.
The whole thing is like, you know what? I can still make records. I can still have a good, happy marriage. I can still do things, but I have to be aware of what's going on with me, and just watch the sugar. Just watch the caffeine. But get sleep, and I've been able, luckily, to manage it without medication. Whereas, I know there's people that have a real tough, lot of real tough.
Absolutely, yeah.
Problems compared to that. Where I win personally for myself is that music has been something that if I'm in a crowd, I got to get out, because I hear too many people talking, and it's just weird, and it's very hard for me to concentrate. I get a headache if I have to look at numbers, mathematics.
Oh, yeah. Right.
But if you stick me in front of a pair of speakers, I can tell you if one speaker is louder than the other within a very small range of sound. I can hear layers and colors inside the music. I can focus on that for 10 straight hours without flinching. Whereas if you put me in in other normal situations, I'm a mess. So
right.
Music has always been my way to, hey, apparently I'm not supposed to be able to concentrate. My mind's supposed to race, but why is it I'm very calm, relaxed, my heart goes slow, and I enjoy myself, and I love to concentrate listening to music. So it's like, music's been kind of my medicine, even though I didn't know I had this thing until recently.
Right. And that's also what makes you a very talented, unique artist, because you found your niche, discerning through different ways that other people, it doesn't work. I'm the same way. I don't like to be in crowds or something, but I can turn Annihilator up to 11 and love it, So I think there's a certain thing about that. Maybe the OCD or the ADHD or whatever they want to diagnose us as having. I think that's what makes us unique and different. I always say I have a veracity for veracity, or hunger for the truth. I'm always looking for something that I don't understand. And I think that's what makes you so unique. And I think that's what also makes you so talented as a guitarist, because you do have that special ear for music that maybe some people just wouldn't have that, ability to discern. So, and you're a great lyricist too. You may write, very simple, basic type themes, but the words are catchy and the choruses are catchy and the music fits so well. That's another reason people keep coming back. And I think, like I said, you may not think you're continuing to write good albums, but I have followed your career since the very beginning, and I've only been disappointed maybe once or twice. And that's saying a lot because you're right. I mean, sure,
That's
Metallica are
cool.
billionaires or something. So take a smaller band like Exciter or take a smaller band like Voivod, and you're right. They have their highs and lows, and they've gone through the different vocalists and they've gone through different, different adjustments to different sounds. But we all go back to the Dan Beeler area when we think of Exciter. Whereas it,
Absolutely.
matter of fact, for Christmas I won a loud and I won a Long Live the Loud T-shirt. So
Yeah. I got a few of those, Violence and Force and Heavy Metal Maniac.
yeah, my wife's got my old Heavy Metal Manic T-shirt. It no longer fits, but I need to get. I'm getting older too, so I need to get a size that'll fit
You know
me.
what? Before before I moved to the UK, I was in Ottawa, Canada area, and Dan Beeler was one of my best friends, and he painted my house. He was a painter by trade
Yeah,
for
yeah.
decades, and still is. But he's a friend, and it's just so weird because we went to the same high school. He's older than I am, but he was leaving high school when I was entering high school.
Right.
But that was a hugely influential person on my career too, for sure. I've got to actually run because I missed an interview by 20 minutes.
I was just gonna say, I was like, I hope I'm not keeping you for another interview, Jeff.
You are. That's good. Well, that's a good sign.
All right, I'll message you on Facebook. Thanks for everything. Okay.
Yeah, send me a message on Facebook, and I appreciate the talk. That was really cool.
You
Thank you so much.
you bet.